Hi, Facebook. Aloha. Welcome. Bienvenidos. My name is Barbara DeLuca, President of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Hawaii, where it's our mission to strengthen Hawaii's Hispanic business community through fostering social, economic, and cultural development for all. And when we say for all, our organization is open to Latinos and those who love us. So as they say, we're all in this together, and we need each other for our businesses to thrive. So thank you for joining us today as we discuss the impact of the US Census and how it relates to our Hispanic population. Our special guest panelists today include Carlie Liddell, research statistician. Carlie Liddell is with the Hawaii State Data Center, and partnership specialist Jesus Arriola. He is a Hispanic and legislative community outreach specialist. They'll be answering questions today from myself and 3 members of our board of directors of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which include Kevin Black, immigration attorney, Ruben Juarez, associate professor and graduate chair at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, Daniel Barreto, CEO at DECA International Group. So we have a Q&A available for our attendees, and we will answer some questions at the end of our workshop if you'd like to make any comments or questions. So at this point, I'm going to give the floor to Carlie. Ladies first, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and an overview of the census.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. As Barbara mentioned, I am Carlie Liddell. I'm from the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. Inside of that department, I run the Hawaii State Data Center. The Hawaii State Data Center is a formal partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau, and our job is to be your liaisons in Hawaii to census data. So the census isn't something that just happens once every 10 years, and then otherwise the Census Bureau is, doing other things or, not doing anything at all. The Census Bureau actually has over 100 surveys in the field, basically at all times. The biggest survey being the American Community Survey, which some of you may remember from the 2000 census or earlier, the long form census, which a portion of the population received, and it asked numerous questions, way more detailed than the 10 questions that we have on the census today. So the long form census has been transformed into the American Community Survey, and that American Community Survey then is how we get a lot of the social, economic, demographic, and housing data on the population in the United States between decennial censuses. Okay, so Jesus will be talking about specifically the 2020 census, but I wanted to share some data that we have now on the Hispanic population in Hawaii to give you a sense of what we can learn from census data and how the census impacts what we know and then how we can use the data. So I like to call this census data in action. So this is data on Hawaii's Hispanic population. So just a brief overview of what Hawaii's Hispanic population demographics are. And this is 2010, which was the last decennial census. It was 120,842. And then the population has increased by 30,000 in 9 years. And these will be the 2019 will be the last population estimates that we have before the decennial census. So this gives you a pretty good idea of what the Hispanic population is going to look like for the census that you are all filling out right now. So what we see here is big population increases in the past 9.25 years, about a 25% population increase for the Hispanic population in just a decade, a little less than a decade. And comparatively, let's look at the total population change for the country or for the state of Hawaii. The total population increase has not been as robust, right? Only 4% population change for the total population in Hawaii, which was last in 2019, it was 1.4 million. So the Hispanic population is growing at a much greater rate than the population overall.
That's exciting to see.
Yeah, it's really neat data. I love sharing sort of this the specific data against the total population data. And so here we have the 2010 population data by specific origin. So this is the type of data that we'll expect to get from the 2020 census, and this is only data that we're going to get every 10 years. So when you fill out your census, you're going to be asked your Hispanic or Latino origin, and then you can specify a specific origin. And this is the information that we'll get. And because it's kind of small data, we don't get it regularly. So this is kind of our one shot to figure out specifically where people are coming from with Hispanic or Latino origin. So statewide, we see that it's primarily Mexican. That's the largest group. But then for the majority of the counties, it's Puerto Rican. We see that Mexican is a strong second origin group for most of the counties, which is what pulls it up. Oh gosh, I'm very sorry. It's not even for the state of Hawaii. It is Puerto Rican overall. So excuse that little circle typo. So Puerto Rican is the major specific origin, or was in the 2010 census. And then this large group over here, the other Hispanic and Latino, that includes Spanish and then multiple specific origins. So just some age and language statistics from 2018. This is the latest detailed data that we have for the Hispanic population. So our age distribution for the Hispanic population, it's a quite young population. The median age is 21.5 years. That is compared to a median age of 39.3 years for the state of Hawaii as a whole. So significantly younger, one of the younger groups in Hawaii. And we can see then with large populations and our school age population, 25%. And then our over 65 population is a much smaller population than what we see for the state of Hawaii overall. So that means that the population is, young and growing, and has really a good chance to really shape what Hawaii looks like going into the future.
That's a good point, Carlie. I'm looking at a stat right here for the Hispanic homeownership report, and it shows that more than 60% of Latinos are millennials or younger. So for Generation Z, we have 22.6 million, and millennials 15.1 million. So that's huge as far as homeownership. They're going to be our next. Oh yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So we know, I'll talk a little bit about homeownership in a few minutes, but yeah, we know that millennial homeownership is much lower in the US, but then especially in Hawaii too. And then we can see that kind of playing out then with homeownership statistics for the Hispanic population overall. So then just some briefly about 72% of the Hispanic population speaks English only. With the remaining almost 30% speaking a language other than English at home. I don't have more detailed statistics in this. We would expect that would be Spanish at home, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to say that kind of definitively until later. But the Hispanic population that speaks English less than very well is only 7.5%, which is lower than the overall state percentage, which is 12%. So some education statistics. This is not going to be that surprising because we have such a younger population, but there's a large group of people that have some college or associate's degree. That's about 35%. We've got about 20% with bachelor's degree and 8.8% with graduate or professional degree. Less than 30% are high school graduates only, and less than 9% have less than a high school diploma. So inside of drilling into this college or associate's degree, those are people that could also be in school right now. So we can look at current school enrollment. Now this is going to obviously include people that are younger than 25, right? Because this is current school enrollment, so it's all ages. And we can see that about 12,000 people that are Hispanic in Hawaii are here for college or graduate school. Okay, Then some quick military statistics. This is what we have. And really, it's interesting because we don't get very many like rigorous military statistics overall. So we kind of have to drill into the data a little bit to figure this out. But again, the total Hispanic population is 151,000. And then the Hispanic Armed Forces population in 2018 was around 7,000. And the vet population is around 8,000. And then I say that it includes military dependents in the civilian population because we know that a lot of military families come here, with spouses and children and other military dependents, but we cannot separate those out from the civilian population overall. Okay. And then some household statistics. As we said, owner versus renter, it's pretty stark for the Hispanic population in Hawaii. Only 37.3% own, and this is opposed to 58% for the population overall. And then so the renting population is much higher than for the state overall. But as Barbara was saying, with a younger population, it means, and then especially in Hawaii, that you get a renting population. Average household size is small, though, so it's mainly, family households. What you're looking at are primarily, parents and a child or two children. So this is household composition, and this is for all households with a Hispanic householder, so it doesn't matter if it's owner or renter. So we see that primarily family households, and then about half of all households are married couple households. And then female householders with no spouse present, but in a family household are about 18% or 17%. And then we can also see, and this is what we would expect given the large school age population, that a lot of family households have children in them, about over 40%. And then for non-family households, that's about a quarter of the Hispanic households are non-family households, with about 20% of people living alone. So then just a couple income and industry statistics, because I know this crowd is interested in the business numbers. So income and earnings, median household income, so that's everyone in the household who is an earner, is around 70,000, and the median family income, as we know, most Hispanic family or most Hispanic households are families. Their median income is about 73,000, and then per capita income is 23,000. Just for reference, this is about the median household income is about $10,000 less than the median household income for the total population, which is 80,212.
That would make sense why there's more renters, and we need to work on that education statistic.
Well, you had the large, not yet completed college, but completed high school. And so we don't know if those are people that, have an associate's degree or had a couple years of college and then stopped and are in the workforce, or if those are people that, are currently attending school. So it could be people still continuing education or that had a little bit of college and stopped after that. Yeah. And then median earnings for full-time year-round workers for men and women are shown. Men make about $9,000 more than women in Hawaii.
We've got to work on that too, ladies.
And then we have here, finally, industries of the civilian employed population, so not the military population. The biggest industry is the education, healthcare, and social assistance, which is about 22%, followed by the large encompassing industry of arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, and food. So that's a mouthful, right? And that's our tourism industry overall. And then the third being the professional and scientific services, and then followed by retail, which we also know is very much tied to our tourism industry. And so that's what I have to share with you. All of these data are available on our website at census.hawaii.gov, and I'm also happy to take any specific data requests or data questions. My job, normally when it's not 2020 time, and even still when it is 2020 time, is to liaise with community members, with students, with nonprofits, to help with data and to help people understand data. It's my passion, it's what I love to do, so please use me as a resource if you are interested in learning more about Hawaii census data.
Be careful, Carlie.
Well, the census is wrapping up soon. I'm going to need some more to put on my plate.
You know, I didn't know the state had that. Otherwise, I'll be sending you students.
No, please do. Please do. I often take, especially grad students, I like to help them a lot because they have a lot of really interesting questions and a lot of the data skills to dig into it. So I love being a resource for them to kind of, help lead them to better data knowledge and understanding.
Yeah.
Are you going to share this that presentation with us?
Absolutely, yes. So I've already shared it with Barbara, and Barbara, please feel free to pass that along.
Okay, I'll be happy to share that on our Facebook page for our viewers too.
Fantastic, thank you.
That's great information. And what do you have for us today, Jesus?
Thank you for that. So my name is Jesus Arriola. I'm with the U.S. Census Bureau. I am the Hispanic liaison and legislative liaison. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect.
Perfect.
So I'm just going to share a little bit about the census. I did want to go over, just an overview, the importance operating during COVID-19, and then we can get into some Q&A. And please feel free to stop me if you have any questions. And yep. So let me actually, sorry, I want to try and minimize everyone here. Okay. So the census is in the Constitution. It is done every 10 years, and it really is for apportionment. So I didn't know about apportionment until I came to the census, and it's really about the districts for our representatives and our senators. So that's really what apportionment is. And after the census is complete, in about a year to 2 years, the district will change, and then there's actually a re-election. So typically the Senate here in Hawaii is a 4-year term. Because of the census and the apportionment, there's an election this year, 2020, there's going to be another election in 2022. So it cuts that term short in order to redistrict the boundaries. It also has to do with distribution of funds, and I'll get into that. And then, we try and do this as a civil engagement. Everyone has a voice, everyone has a vote, and part of the census is just that. As you can see here, the census, our goal is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. Originally that was set for April, but everything we've had to stay flexible in order to complete our mission. So as you can see here, it is to establish where to count, which originally was April, to motivate people to respond, self-response, because the census is a self-response. Those that do not self-respond then get a follow-up, which is non-response follow-up, or also known as NARFU. And then all this data is gathered, but it is confidential. We do have, we take an oath, but other than that, the report is set up so that the data is not traceable to the individual, and I can go in on that, I'll hit on that. And then it stays locked up for about 75 years, and that's what we use for some of these genealogy, and I'll get on that as well. So just to reassure everyone, the census is confidential. There is Title 13 that sets it up so that it's protected under law. This is never shared. The results of the census are reported in a summary format, so more of the data that Carlie uses. And it is 72 years. So it is locked up for 72 years, and then it will be released. And that's more for the genealogy, for people to be able to trace. Some of these websites are great resources. And then we do take an oath, and if broken, there is a heavy punishment and fine. I wanted to share about the questionnaire that everyone has gotten. So it does start off with how many people live or stay in your home as of April 1st, because our goal is to count everyone once where they're at, and only once, whether the home is owned or rented, the sex of each person, the age, date of birth of every individual, the race, about whether a person is of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, and that's the ethnicity question, and then about the relationship of each person in the household. And this is kind of what it looks like. We do offer support in different languages because we know that, everyone here is basically, not really from here. So it does give everyone the option and the opportunity to get counted. And again, it's important to get counted for the community, for reapportionment, for some of the federal funding, but really just to have a voice. Language assistance information for you. I wanted to kind of bring us up to date where we're at now. So like I mentioned before, we have stayed flexible and things and dates have changed. So the self-response option is still available until October 31st. And you can do that online or over the phone or a paper questionnaire. This has shifted the timeline for reapportionment of the areas. And we are starting field operations this Thursday. So if you haven't self-responded yet, you might get someone coming knocking on your door as early as this Thursday, but you still have the opportunity to self-respond so that if someone does come by, you can just let them know, or you don't even have to answer if you feel, because of COVID. But I do want to reassure everyone that we are taking the precautions, wearing the mask, social distancing. Health is our first concern. People's health is very important. So we are taking and trying our best not to have any kind of close contact. Now, this is pertaining to the hard to count populations. So we are part of this hard to count, right? We are minorities. We do want a voice. So that's really why I take so much pride in what I do, is I see how it does affect everything moving forward. The data is really important, not just for us to be counted, but for information for small businesses. And a lot of things we've been talking over the last couple of days, the data is key. This is an example of what the tracks look like. So this is just an example of what and how it's categorized and how the data is set up. And again, personal identifiable information is not included. So you're never given like a name and a number. It's always kept separate. And then even then, it is organized more of data. So restarting Hawaii Census field operations, like I mentioned, this Thursday is the non-response. And that's when we'll be having people go out into the field, knocking on doors, trying to make sure that everyone's had the opportunity to get counted. This is a little bit of the information of other, I did get some questions beforehand. So group quarters, and that's more military, and update leave is complete. MQA is mobile questionnaire assistance. So the idea was to set up locations for the community to come to. That's still in the works because of the adjustment and that we had to do. And then again, non-response does go up until mid-October. There's some data for the response rates for Hawaii. Our national self-response rate is at 61, and we're right there with the nation. Honolulu is at the top, and then followed by Kauai, Maui, Big Island, Molokai. This is just a little bit more information on how we address and how we try to focus on certain areas here, just to make sure and help those that need to be counted. So this is one of the big things that I really try and share with everyone, right? The funding that comes from the federal government. And I think we've seen it more now than ever, how important it is. So, for our services, for our local government, for our small businesses, for planning, urban, rural land use, scientific research. Yeah, it's really important to see that the funding does come to the communities. And again, more now than ever, we really need to be able to make sure that that funding is used. So this is some of the amounts, some data on how much federal funding does come to the communities. Big one, of course, we have Medicaid, student loans, the SNAP WIC program, Medicare, highway planning, construction, housing.
So these numbers are at the federal level or state level?
These are at the federal level. The state level, I believe I do have that as well. But yes, this is And again, the source is the George Washington University Institute of Public Policy. There's a lot of really good resources out there, and it's really nice to see how there are, universities and nonprofits tracking the funding to make sure that it gets to where it's supposed to. This is the Hawaii one. So this is actually how much goes into the WIC here for Hawaii, how much goes into SNAP program, Medicare, our highway and planning. Again, the state budget does receive a lot of federal funding, and sometimes it's a match. So the state is required to put a certain amount into a program ID, and then the federal government will match it somehow. The school lunch program, the Head Start program, there's a lot of programs that the communities rely on that are federally funded. Okay. I wanted to share what Census Ambassadors do. So basically we ask to partner up, and once we partner up, we try and help to spread education, really asking people to complete their survey to make sure that that everyone is counted. We do have some media and commercials. I'm not sure if everyone's seen some of them, but it really is a push to let people know, like, we want to be counted so that we have our voice heard. Here's some online resources. Again, there's a lot of really good resources out there. A lot of universities, nonprofits that use the funding and track the funding to make sure that it's distributed correctly. And if you have any more questions, I'm happy to share. We can go into different details and how, I know we've been working closely with Carlie. The data is key, and really it has so many uses, and we want to make sure that it's correct, and so that we can actually benefit from it. Here's a little bit about the genealogy. So I think this is really cool because after 72 years, the records are released. I mean, there's still, and this is great. This is really nice because actually I have my brother that's been able to trace our genealogy, and it's because of data. It's about, it's this information that we don't want to lose. And personally, it's really nice. And then this is our COVID-19 information. So we do have COVID19.census.gov that's helping kind of track impact of planning. And it's going to be interesting to see how we move forward through this pandemic. And as we get the data and compile it, and who knows, a couple years down the line, it's going to come come handy to try and see and track things that are going on right now that we don't really know about. And that's it.
Thank you, Jesus. I think Daniel had a question on the questions number 8 and 9 on the census form.
We also have a written question in the Q&A from Marisol.
Okay, what does it say? 5. Marisol says, how do you encourage people not to be afraid to fill out the census? Everyone I know is afraid of being deported because now their info is out there.
Well, the information is confidential. And again, when the census is completed, it is secure, it is protected by Title 13. And then nothing really moves in a way to be able to identify the person. So it is split up. And then the data is actually compiled into numbers and percentages. It doesn't, there's no way for it to be traceable back to the person the way that the data is taken.
So Jesus, this is related to the question that I had, and is regarding this memo from President Trump a few days ago, and basically saying that they are going to be able to track undocumented immigrants, right, by combining different data sets. So how do we know that that is not going to happen?
I've been thinking about this question, and really the census's scope is to count everyone once. And that's really what the census's part is. When it leaves the census, when I looked at that quote, it actually, to me, I interpreted that it was pertaining to reapportionment. But again, regardless, the data is not really kept the way that would work, if that makes sense. It's really broken down into numbers, figures, and not so much name. Like a name is never in line with the person's address or number, or it's really split up when it's compiled and when it leaves. The U.S. Census Bureau's job is to secure that information, so it won't release it in any way for it to be put back in a sense where it can be used against anyone. And then to add to that, there is no citizenship question, so it doesn't really align, right? Because trust me, I was digging because that's something I'm concerned about too, but it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Marisol actually mentioned that maybe there should be a huge campaign to let people know that, because it's a misconception.
Yeah, on the data side, just to reiterate, of course, the data are confidential, are secure, but for the decennial census, it's not even asked, right? So your immigration status isn't asked, your foreign-born status isn't asked. It's not there. It's just point blank. It's not a question that's on the form. So that's not even information that you have to worry about the Census Bureau disaggregating out or separating out, right? Because it's not a question that's asked to begin with. It is asked on the American Community Survey, which about 2% of Hawaii's population is surveyed in the American Community Survey every year. So it's not the same large swath of population. That's the full enumeration is only every 10 years, and it's not a question that's asked. From the data side, if you were going to try to reconcile administrative data with census data, I mean, there are a lot of really, really smart people out there, and I can't even imagine how that would begin to be addressed, right? Because you'd have to get every state to comply to hand over their administrative data, and then you have to hope that the administrative data is up to date, and that states even gather information on foreign-born versus native-born populations. Just from a data point of view, it's so complex. And then from a census point of view, the question isn't asked.
I have a follow-up question to that. Thanks, you guys, by the way, for going through all that stuff with us. That was awesome. And I think the concern among some of my community here on Maui, I'm on a different island, and I have a lot of constituents and clients who are both documented and undocumented, and some of them are in mixed status families. And I think the concern is two things. I think what the memo did is that it raises two issues. Issue number one is that for some reason, the president and the executive branch feels like they can disseminate from the data who is undocumented and where they are, because otherwise his memo makes no sense. So you're right, it is about a reapportionment, but what he said is he wants to reapportion excluding the counting of anybody who's undocumented. And so therefore he knows who's undocumented and where they are. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theory, I'm just going based off of what his memo says, it seems that he is confident, or the executive branch is confident, that they will be able to determine from the data who is documented and who isn't, and where they are. And that's problematic, obviously, for people, because even if you can't attach data to an individual person, if you know that there are a large number of undocumented people in a certain area, then you can target enforcement in that area and endanger people and separate families and so forth. So that's one concern. The second concern is that the memo itself indicates that his primary purpose is one of disenfranchisement. Like his goal is that he doesn't want undocumented people, or he doesn't want undocumented people to have a voice and to be counted. And so if the executive branch's stated explicit open goal is to use the data to disenfranchise rather than to enfranchise people, that's also problematic for people who want to weigh the risk versus the benefit of responding to this thing.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It does bring concern, but again, as well, I like to remind everyone, the reason that the census is available is that we're counted so that we have a voice. And then, not to get too much into it, but this is why our vote is so important. We want to vote someone that's going to look after the people. So it's a good reminder of why we need to do our part.
No, my question was around number 8 and 9, how it's a little bit confusing in terms of most Hispanics identify from where they're from, right? So I'm from Puerto Rico, I'm from Mexico, et cetera, and they don't delineate that in those two questions. So they ask race, and then they ask, I believe, I don't have it in front of me, Barbara, help me out. They have race, and then they identify with, or what country they identify with. So there's a bit of confusion in question 8 and 9.
Right, number 9 was the,
Is that
what do you identify with?
words at all, or?
Yes, no, and great question. And I love that we're talking about this. So the question, ethnicity, right? 1997, this Office of Management and Budget set up this question, ethnicity and then race. Ethnicity, if you are Hispanic, Latino descendant, if you affiliate or associate, right? Because it's self-response, it's really about us, right? About you as an individual. And if you do, then you have the option of race and the way that it's categorized. And again, part of it is, this was set in place, 23 years ago. So we have a voice. We're getting more of a voice as a minority, as Hispanics, Latinos. That question is there, and it's, to me, I look at it, how can we use this? My parents are from Mexico. I consider myself Chicano. My parents are Mexican. I'm born in Texas, in the US. I'm fortunate. And with that, it's a good reminder, like, okay, how do I want to be represented? And yes, first is the ethnicity question. Do you affiliate yourself Hispanic, Latino origin? And then you have the option of race. And I know it's confusing because this is what I've been doing. The race question, which is, do you white, Black, Native American, Pacific Islander, and then you have the option of other. And it's really about, since it is a self-response, who do you associate yourself? Where do you, right? But yeah, it is a tricky question. I do agree, especially if you're not used to the census. And honestly, we can change this, right? Yes. Like, this can be changed, and that's why we want a voice.
We have the CEO of the HTLA on, so I know that he's Mufi Hanneman. I know he's very interested, and the hotels are actually very interested in this data. So I know some of them were kind of scoffing at me a couple of months ago when I started bringing up Hispanic numbers. I'm sure all of you have in your own business. And, even this morning I was talking to a retailer, Safeway on the mainland, and they were kind of laughing at me. They were like, those numbers can't be true. I said, well, unless I'm making them up, here you go, right? So I think it's just becoming such an important part of Hawaii, and not to over speak it, but we really are enriching the culture of Hawaii with the best of ours, right? And then isn't that what America is about, right? America is about taking the best of each culture and sewing it into the tapestry of it. So it's exciting. Hey, when I first came here, it was me and the Spanish teacher from Punahou. It was two of us. So that's all I remember. But thank you for your answer. Thank you.
And I had asked Carlie the same question about if you mark Hispanic on the first question, on number 8, and then on number 9, you mark white, Black, Asian, those are your options. Your answer was that most Hispanics report that they're either Hispanic white or Hispanic other, correct?
Great. Yeah. So in 2000 and in 2010, the top race response for the Hispanic population in the U.S. Was white, and the second largest population was some other race. Included in some other race are people who didn't answer the race question, right? So if it really doesn't fit, I mean, you're supposed to fill it all out. So Jesus may plug his ears as I say this, but if the race question really doesn't fit for you, you could skip it. Right, you might get a phone call from someone saying, "Hey, you skipped this question. Can you give me your response?" In which case, you could say "other." But more than likely, you're not going to get a phone call for just skipping one question. And that's not going to negate your census form. It's not going to mean that you're not counted for the Hispanic population. Right? You saw my presentation. That was the Hispanic total population, regardless of the race data. But then also remember that Hawaii is really multiracial, right? So maybe you identify as Hispanic because a parent of yours is Hispanic, but maybe another parent of yours is Native Hawaiian or, Japanese or something, right? So having the ethnicity question and the race question gets to make sure that you're fully representing, your background.
I have a question. Going back to why it is important to fill out the census. So is there like an estimate of how much money does the state loses whenever someone is not counted? Like they just skip to the census somehow? Like is there a number that you guys can put?
Jesus, if you have that number off the top of your head, please take it. Otherwise, I can dig through some of my data here and pull out what our latest estimate is based on the GW.
But there is an estimate, right? I'm sure it's like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars.
Correct. There is an estimate, and I don't want to just throw a number out there, but the way it is calculated is over time, over 10 years, X amount of money. Yes. And again, that's a big deal because that's the money that goes for our schools, our roads, our programs. So it does make an impact. It does.
I had a question, and not to continue to go back to the confidentiality issue, but I was reading an article that to help figure out the U.S. citizen status of every adult living in the country, the Trump administration has made agreements to accumulate driver's license and state ID card information from states including Iowa, Nebraska, South Carolina, and South Dakota. It's just an article that I was reading. I don't know. Have you heard that? And I know it doesn't include Hawaii, but.
So I've heard that is something that the Trump administration is attempting to do. And the joys of federalism is that, not just one aspect of government holds all information, right? And, the federal government doesn't just get to demand things and then state governments or local governments hand it over, right? States have power, local governments have power. And I don't work for the governor's office. I don't work for the attorney general's office. So I can't speak for how that would be handled in Hawaii. But, there is sort of a division of power in the United States that doesn't just allow it to be up to the executive. So.
Could I make a comment to, back when you were going through your slides, Jesus, you showed a slide that showed the different types of sort of in the broad category would be public benefits, but it says there was SNAP was in there, and I think Medicaid and some other types of assistance, Head Start. So I just want to make you guys aware too that when you do outreach to the Maui community, that I don't mean to speak on behalf of, but I've noticed that there's another intersection or overlap with what's going on with regard to undocumented folks, and that has to do with there's a new public charge rule that went into effect on February 24th of this year, and it's a increased scrutiny of every single person who's trying to increase or improve their status to that of a lawful permanent resident, a person with a green card, they're now, they're past whether they've ever received a public benefit like SNAP or Medicaid or any kind of assistance that comes from either federal or state government, is that can prevent them or preclude them from increasing or improving their status. So a lot of my constituents and clients won't avail themselves of those benefits anyways. And so when you outreach to this community, it's important to be aware that you're asking them to be counted so that they can increase the amount of those types of means-tested public benefits for which these folks are not eligible for or are afraid to apply for, even if they are eligible for them. So I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. I mean, that's huge, right? And that's, you said February 24th, so that's recent. You know, the least I can do is get back to you on that, because that's something that I'm very concerned about, because personally, given the circumstances right now, I look towards promoting SNAP, right? It's fairly funded. It doesn't take away from the state budget. And right now we're trying to, as a state, utilize what we can get from the federal government. But that is very concerning and alarming, because that's not the way that this should be used. So I know we're going to be in touch. So definitely would love to follow up with you on that.
I have one last question. I don't know if it's a last question, but let's see here. So everyone in the US needs to be counted, correct? Only one time. So how does the census account for the military that lives overseas? That's part one. And the military that's stationed in Hawaii, are they counted as part of our population if they file residency in another state?
So group quarters takes care of that. And yes, so military-wise, there is something set in place called GQ, group quarters. Okay. And that is where the military does count people overseas and takes that into account. And then we're here for Hawaii. Carlie, could you jump in on that second part?
Sure. Yeah. So you are counted where you live and sleep most of the time, not where your driver's license says, not where you're registered to vote, not where your home base is. So military that live in Hawaii are counted in Hawaii. Most people are going to be counted, and it's really important to say that, because most military are going to be counted in self-response, right? Because they live in military housing that's not in the group quarters. So they're, not in barracks. They're not in otherwise a position where they're going to be counted through administrative records. They're going to be counted the same way, the rest of us are counted, which is receiving something in the mail and then filling it out and sending it back. And they should fill it out for Hawaii. It's where you live and sleep most of the time, which is Hawaii, regardless of, if you're only going to be here for a few years, or, if your driver's license says you're from Arkansas or Texas or, wherever. If you're living here, you're counted here. And that's because we need to make sure that, that resources are being properly allocated, right? There's funding for like transportation. And if you live here, then you're driving on our roads. So that means you need to be counted here, right? Your kids are going to school here, so you need to be counted here. And it's, I know a lot of people are, have questions about that, because they're like, well, we're just here for a couple of years. We don't live here, but you do now. At least for the next few years, you live here and should be counted here.
That's right. You eat and sleep here. Thank you for that answer.
Yes. And I'll share the key is April 1st. So when the questionnaire and when people go for the mobile questionnaires or even the call center, they do refer to where were you April 1st. Yeah.
Kevin, you really bring up something disturbing, because there's a lot of people, particularly now, that need so much help. How do we as a group, and it's not a question for Carlie or Jesus, how do we as a group, create something to help those folks that don't have the opportunity to go to SNAP or WIC or et cetera? I think as business leaders, we have to put our minds together and go to the city governments and the state government and say, hey, these folks need help too, but we need to kind of I don't want to say jump over the feds, but we want them to become, we want them on the right path to citizenship, and this is not, we need to help them, right? And how do we do that? So I'd love to get something to, put somebody together or put a group together to at least start getting some kind of help out to these folks, because that's disturbing. The fact that they can't apply for a direct path to citizenship, because I'm not going to get political, I promise, because of whatever reason. I mean, we need to help those folks, like, immediately, right? And so I have some friends in retail that can help with essentials, food and that type of stuff. But we need a plan. As business leaders, we need a plan to help those folks. Help everybody in Hawaii too, right? But specifically Hispanics, because they want the path to citizenship. So disturbing.
I agree. I think that could be the subject for our next Facebook Live.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important takeaway that as it relates to the census is that the announcement by the administration that the applying for any type of public benefit will prevent you from being able to increase or improve your status later on has a chilling effect on everybody who applies for anything. So the fine details of the law as it's passed, there's exemptions for children who are under 18, women who are pregnant, including the first year after birth, U.S. citizens. So if you have children who are U.S. citizens, they're exempt. But the overall effect is a chilling effect. So people who need medical help or food, I've had people call my office and say, there's a food distribution at the church, but I'm afraid to go because I'm afraid that will count as a public charge situation and I don't want to get in trouble. And they also don't know that it's not just the pathway to citizenship, but it could be a reason to have, enforcement against you. And similarly, the announcement by the Trump administration of this memo has a chilling effect too on the community, because they may not understand the finer points of how the data is separated from the person, but what they do know is that the person in charge has an overt and explicit desire to disenfranchise people and to use that data against them. And so I think it's important to outreach to the community and say, these are the reasons why you should respond to the data. And I support that. And I don't mean to bring these things up to discourage people from responding. I just feel like it's important to understand the challenges as you folks, Carlie and Jesus, reach out to the typically undercounted groups, and among them Latinos, to realize what the challenges are, that these announcements have a chilling effect on the community and make them reluctant to respond, especially when somebody's knocking on their door. So thanks for letting me grab the soapbox for a minute, and I relinquish the spotlight.
Well, thanks to you, Kevin, and the rest of you that are watching now, because you are all community leaders. You're part of the Chamber of Commerce. You have a platform and you have a voice, and so I really appreciate you all, asking questions and taking the time to learn more about this, because you are trusted voices, and you can help us to kind of dispel disinformation and be advocates in the process too. So thank you for letting us talk and giving us the space and time tonight.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Very much.
In closing, thank you everybody for your time, and all our attendees and all our whoever's watching on Facebook Live. I do want to just remind everybody that in the comments, I'm going to put a link to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce website if you're interested in membership. It's $75 per individual, and we can discuss that. And then also, we're going to be hosting our next webinar. It's going to be facilitated by Mr. Kevin Black, and it's going to be Immigration 101 in August. So stay tuned for that. Follow our page, like our page, and we'll be posting more information. And Jesus, I'm going to post a link there for anybody who wants to self-report for the census. If you don't want them knocking on your door, click the link. And that's all I got to say. So thank you, everybody.
Great job, Barbara.
All right.
Thank you, Jesus and Carlie. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Carlie. Jesus.
Bye-bye now.
Aloha, everybody. Adios.